We'll call the Tuesday, October 3rd Financial Affairs Committee meeting to order, beginning with a roll call, starting with Mr. Cohen.
Mr. Cohen present.
Julie Haywood present.
Jenny Lumen present.
Leah Mulhern present.
Dan Schultz present.
Charles Burdell Williams present.
Joel Fishbein present.
Zachary Epps present.
All right. The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. And now we can go to our actual agenda. Mr. Swigart.
Thank you, Dan. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
All right, I will start just quickly going over the agenda. As always, we'll take a look at the interim financial statements through the end of the current month preceding this meeting. We'll take a brief look at the draft year-end results, and we will talk about the Act One timeline. So not a hefty agenda tonight, being the beginning of the school year in October, but some important information nonetheless. All right, so looking at our financial report through September 30th of 2023, and looking at the balance sheet, the listing of our assets, liabilities, equity, you can see, as we always pay attention to, our cash is strong. Our current cash balance is 103 million versus 90 million at this time last year, showing growth in our cash balance is always a positive sign. One other item I wanted to draw attention to on the asset side that we don't normally pay attention to is prepaid expenditures. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But this year we're showing $449.5 million of prepaid expenditures versus 1.5 in the prior year. Moving down a bit, you'll see our equity. Last year at this time we had $25 million in equity. This year we have $33 million in equity, which represents an increase of 8.5 million, or the approximate change in net assets for the prior fiscal school year ended June 30th, 2023. So in essence, our net income for the prior school year. High level, as of September 30th, 2023, we collected $91 million of revenue versus $89 million last year, and our expenditures to date are almost comparable. 23.7 million versus 23.4 million. If we take a deeper dive into our revenues and expenditures through September 30th, on the local side, the increase shown of $2.8 million in our local source revenue is real estate taxes driven by the increase in the real estate tax rate, the 1.1% increase, and interest income. That makes up the vast majority of this $2.8 million over the prior year. Going down the expenditure side, you can see it's very stagnant with only a $248 million change from year to year. Some of these increases are just due to timing payments we've made to, in this case, the MCIU for our annual services. That was just made sooner this year than last year. Some of it is our debt structure, our principal and interest structure, and the timing is paid within the year. Some of it's ESSER spending that was done earlier last year than this year. But at the end of the day, structurally, our expenditures are similar to the prior year.
Excuse me, I missed the interest. Where is it?
So interest is included in local source income. So this 87 million is earned income tax, real estate taxes, transfer taxes, mercantile taxes, interest income. Again, looking at our monthly graph and our trend of revenues, it typically looks like this versus the straight line of expenditures. Again, shooting for a gap here at the end of the year. All right, any questions on the financial statements through September 30th?
About the interest. Last year was anomaly, I think, high. How are we doing? What part of it is interest versus the other inputs?
I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but I believe about $500,000 of that 2.8 is interest income up to date.
So it's still higher than it had been for a while.
So we're still at peak interest rate. Yeah.
Any other board questions? I had one question around the state revenue, which I know is it's ultimately going to be up, but it's down now. Is that just a function of?
That's just a timing
Timing
issue.
of
when we
that,
receive the money.
Any-
So a lot of the money we've been receiving has just been drawing down our receivable balances that were due at the end of the year.
Any questions from the public on this section so far? All right, we can go to the next.
All right, so we'll look at very similar reports, but this time through the end of the district's fiscal year. This is our year-end close, June 30th, 2023. Our fiscal year surrounds our school district year, so we don't follow the traditional calendar year like the township does or most organizations. So our year-end results as of June 30th, 2023 are summarized here. You can see again the strong growth in cash that's driven by our increase, our change in our fund balance for the year. And I'll skip right to revenues and expenditures. So on the local revenue side for the fiscal year, we collected $104 million of local revenue versus $102 in the prior year, an increase of $1.6 million. That's interest income, that's real estate taxes. On the state side, the increase was $1.5 million. That's the state subsidies, that's the homestead. And on the federal side, we still have a steady stream of ESSER money coming in, so that was comparable from year to year. I broke these out. I'll just flip to the next slide. So I took a deeper dive on some of the larger changes of local revenues through June 30th, 2023. So we had a 1.6% increase in real estate tax collections. That approximately equates to the real estate tax increase for the year. Some of it was driven by increases in assessments. On the earned income tax side, we had an 8.3% growth in earned income taxes, or $354,000. Here's where it gets interesting. Transfer taxes, as we all know, the real estate market slowed down a bit. Most of our transfer taxes are coming from new developments, not from just regular housing turnover. So we are seeing a significant drop in that category. Still running strong at about this $1.2 million rate this year, but that we could see a decrease in that by the end of the year. Just for reference, on average, we collect about $900,000 a year in transfer taxes. So this 1.9 million was an anomaly. This 1.2 is better than average. And oh yeah, for reference, I should have mentioned earned income taxes. We on average collects 3.6 million per year. We still have a strong tax base in that department. And that average, I would assume, would have to increase after the past 2 years, and expect it to be going forward. Delinquent real estate taxes collections also dropped. That's a sign of a good economy. That's a sign of our outstanding receivables being collected and debts being paid. So in this category, our average collection is 2.2 million per year. So slightly below average, but within the realm. And the final category was earnings on investment. So for the 21-22 school year, the prime interest rate at the bank was basically as close to zero as it could get, with a pittance of earnings interest. Now the Fed Reserve rate has obviously moved. That movement began in 2023 and progressed throughout the school year to where now it is currently, which is right around 5%, which is the max it's been. So we're holding on this line, and it probably is somewhat safe to assume we'll have a similar outcome this year as well in terms of earnings on investments. So only a 4,000% increase.
Can you bet?
Take that to the bank, right?
On the state side, I just listed our budgeted state subsidy increase, which was 580,000. Special education was 260,000, and we had this one-time homestead allotment that was given out to all the school districts as the casino bill money had finally filled the necessary coffers to where the money can start spilling back out to school districts, and that increase was $600,000. But this number is stagnant going forward. And on the ESSER side, we still continue to spend through the allotted money the district was given. So you saw we had comparative revenue from year to year. Any questions on the revenues?
On the delinquent real estate taxes, we collected less this year than last. But that depends, in my mind, on how much is delinquent, like what percentage of the delinquency did we collect? What's the delinquency, is basically what I'm asking. That was on a prior slide, but I forget.
Yes, that's 2.8 million. So that's listed as an asset and as a liability on our balance sheet.
So we're collecting a really good percentage of that. Yeah, good. Thanks.
Are you taking questions on, is this the end of this agenda item, or are you taking on the full agenda, on this entire?
I was just on revenues.
Just on
revenues.
Why, if it's okay, let's wait until you, before I go to the public, or
Sure.
finish this agenda item, and then I'll
Sure.
open it up.
All right, looking on the expenditure side for last year, 70% of the school district's money is salary and benefits, allotted for teachers and support staff and administrators. Looking particularly at regular instruction, which is our teaching staff, our salaries were, in essence, relatively flat from year to year. There was a decrease in some of our teaching staff due to attrition, due to retirements, and some reduction in some of the need for teachers in some of our school buildings. On the benefit side, you can see we have a large increase. This is retirement, and it is health insurance. So there was a $505,000 increase from year to year. That pattern repeats itself in special education, where there's a $789,000 increase in our special ed department for benefits. If you all recall, we last year took our autistic program and brought it in-house and hired our own staff to run our autistic program. So I wanted to point out on the special ed program, on the special ed side, in 21-22, we had $7.7 million of special education salaries for teachers and paraprofessionals. And this year, that number was $9.2 million. And that's the reason for that increase, is the reabsorption of that program. On the flip side, we used to pay the MCIU to run that program. So that was $4.5 million paid through professional services, and that number dropped to $2 million. So this cost was, in essence, offset to bring that program back in-house. On the charter school side, we briefly had touched on this in the past. We did have a decrease in the number of students attending charter schools, but the way the state charter school formula works is it takes our budgeted expenditures and divides it by our number of students. So in a year when you have a rising budget, you have a decreasing enrollment in your student population, the tuition grows faster than what it would in the reverse scenario. So even though we have fewer students, we had a higher tuition rate. We did have a decrease in our charter school expenditure, but the 3% doesn't reflect the decrease in the number of students attending charter schools. It was actually more. On the support side, there was growth in pupil services and professional services. This was through some grants we got from the state for mental health and for counselors brought into the school buildings. So they were professional services since it was tied to a grant and not permanent money. On the business side, we had an agreement with Keystone Realty Advisors for the assistance in some of the historical real estate appraisals. Those expenditures went away this year, so because they went away, that was a savings of $583,000 on those assessments. And on the technology side, there was growth to the tune of $765,000. And those expenditures encompass smart panel installations and Chromebook installations across the district, which was spending down some of the ESSER 3 money to bring our classrooms and access for our classrooms to our households in response to COVID. So any questions on the expenditure side?
Ms. Lum?
Where are the PSER payments accounted for in expenditures?
So benefits includes payroll taxes, PSERs,
PSERs, okay.
health insurance, life insurance, all.
Okay.
for the entire benefit package.
Mr. Fishbein?
Just want to point out that in bringing the special education autistic support program in-house, roughly $200,000 of savings. After we paid extra benefits and salary, but decreased the amount we were paying the IU, it was net savings. Whether that, it was something that we talked about going into it, and we realized the savings commensurate with what we had expected. Just pointing that out.
And that's even after salary increases, scheduled salary increases are taken into account as well. Okay. Are there other slides on this agenda item, or should I go this? Okay. So any other board questions on all of this? I do want to highlight, just because the text is small, and I don't think these numbers were stated out loud, but the net difference between expenditures and revenues was, and you actually had alluded to, maybe I don't mean to jump the gun, but you had alluded to the prepaid debt.
Yes, I did skip over that, you were correct.
Yes.
So if I jump back to the June 30th to the year-end financial results, we had seen earlier through September 30th that we had a $9.5 million increase to our fund balance. That's representative of this net change in fund balance for the year. There was $1 million decrease in our prepaid expenditure balance because that number needed to be adjusted, and that number is reflected here as a one-time adjustment. So that I shouldn't have crossed it out. That was $1 million adjustment down on our prepaids. So all said and told, it would have been a $9.5 million surplus had this number not been included.
And that adjustment was due to, it's an accounting item from a decade ago, so it was a long time ago that was being carried forward.
So our prepaid expenditures typically include prepaid software licensing, and we prepay some of our textbook purchases in order to realize some of the savings from that prepayment. There was a payment 10 years ago made to CPAS, which is our health insurance plan, which has since been completely absorbed into the cost of the plan. So there was no value left, so it needed to be adjusted downward. Right. So I knew we had talked about that, and I wanted to make sure. The other thing I'll just note, and this is a comment less questions, we have many members of the public here. That 8.5 surplus does represent it reflects largely, I would say, a lot of the income from interest, as well as some abnormalities. But the other side of it is, as we're looking forward over the next several years at what we need to do to address our facilities, it is in some ways helping us build out the assets we need and are going to need in order to address the outcomes of our feasibility study. So I just wanted to underscore that it's, normally, if we were looking at an $8 million surplus, we would be saying, okay, that's a lot. That's a lot of extra. And it is, but it's healthy given that we also have some not too far in the distance needs in the Elkins Park High School and the administration building. The facility deficit.
Exactly, facility deficits.
So it's important to point out, last year we took $2 million of the similar surplus and transferred it to the capital fund. We should consider doing something similar this year. We did spend $2 million on the fire alarm system to address some deficiencies at the high school. So that's where that spend goes.
Ms. Haywood.
This is kind of a really good question. Do we have an opportunity to do another holiday, or is that a one-time option?
So we pay, we're self-insured, so every premium we pay to CPAS, to our health insurance provider, just comes right back to us. So some years you have, I guess I'll call them good years, where our members don't experience a lot of medical troubles and don't have a lot of medical bills. And there are some years where you have individuals who have health problems and incur large claims cost, which gets absorbed in the plan. So it can be like a roller coaster, good years, bad years. At this point in time, we aren't in a really good position because medical costs are rising, and we're seeing a lot of new new innovative changes to the medical field, which come with a big cost. And sometimes it takes medical insurance time to adjust its contracts to deal with some of those larger costs. So we're currently at a point where medical costs are increasing close to double digits.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other board questions before I go to the public? Mr. Verdella?
Yep, and more briefly, considering our change in fund balance, just, I know we normally get an update or talk about it at some point, but an idea of what the value of our fund balance is at this point.
It's about $33 million. A lot of that has been carved out towards capital projects and planned spending to address capital needs of the district. This presentation doesn't have a breakout of that spending.
Okay, thank you. One last item that I wanted to make sure to highlight is this is unaudited. These numbers are not audited yet. And we had talked about that at the pre-meeting. The timeline of the audit is, the auditing industry is under duress right now, is my understanding.
There's not a lot of accountants in the world, so
So, but the point is, we will be getting back. We will eventually be getting an audited version of this presentation.
yes. So if you're in high school, you're in college, and you're looking for a great career, there's a plethora of jobs out there. And they're good jobs. So yeah, typically the time frame is the audit is in response to our bonding. It's a bank requirement. It's also a state requirement. So that reporting is done in mid-January. So typically our audit is done around that time frame.
All right. Thank you. So now I will turn it. Are there any questions from the public? Yes. And since it's in banking, yeah, you know the drill.
I am the auditor, so I was gonna put that out there. For the feasibility study, is that still ongoing? Or is that, we're done with that?
So we put some numbers and we put some plans together. We're still reviewing them as a group, as administration.
Okay,
Waiting to push that out.
because the questions we're getting from a lot of the parents are we still on pace for 2024 for the football stadium? Or is that still looming or unsure at this point?
So we're still actively working on the football stadium.
Okay.
We're trying to determine if 2024 is still feasible. That was the original plan. That was the original goal. There are some issues out there with obtaining the number one material in this project is aluminum sands, and one of the largest producers of aluminum in the world is Russia, and there are some difficulty in procuring some of the items we need. So we're trying to pivot and see what we can do to maintain the 2024 timeline, but I don't know if that's 100% possible at this point.
Thank you.
Global society. Any other, and thank you for the question. Any other questions from the public? Yes. If you could say your name and.
Kurt Schwarman,
Great, thank you.
in terms of gathering aluminum from Russia, wouldn't there be other alternatives to, not necessarily to aluminum, but in terms of where to curate this material from? So rather than necessarily getting it from Russia, say, get it from another country or in America also,
Right.
Like pick from different places.
Well, there's a global amount that's available, and when part of that amount drops out and becomes unavailable, then you have more people competing for less, and those who are in the back of the line
Yeah.
have to wait.
All right. Thank you.
And I would imagine that we're procuring almost everything from the United States, but if the market drops out somewhere else, those people who are already at the front of the line for those materials come here to get it, and that puts all the new customers in the back.
Thank you. I think we have another agenda item in the presentation, correct?
Yes. The last item to discuss is the Act One index. So for those of you unfamiliar, the Act One index is an index set by the state which caps the amount that school districts are allowed to increase taxes unless asking for a specific exemption. So this number is released every year on September 30th, and I'm presenting it here just as a guide for and a reference for what the maximum number the district needs to increase taxes to the Act One index, but this number is published out there as an index for school districts. So the current year index, the base index for the state is 5.25%. Cheltenham's adjusted index is 5.3%. This number is driven by the state average weekly wage. It's driven by the employee cost index. You can see that's 5.6%, 4.9%, building at an average. We did have some years of extreme stability, a decade ago. Now we're kind of in a different era, in a different realm. And that's it. I just provided a quick,
Yeah,
a brief summary of what the definition of ECI this all was.
Are there other slides related to
No,
this?
there's
Okay,
not.
so are any board question about the Act One index? Yes. Ms. Muller.
Remind me when we make our, and I'm not saying any kind of what decision needs to be made, but when we have to make a decision about whether we have to vote whether we ask for an exception to this, correct?
Right.
But that's later.
What is
That's typically around mid-January.
I just wanted to, just curious.
Yeah, so we have to make a decision. We want to go on that index.
And I was not suggesting by any means that we were going to do that, but I just wanted to have the date in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, and just because we have so many people here from the public, that is the limit on our taxing authority if we don't seek exceptions. And next time we have an Act One presentation, we can show that almost every year that I've been on the board, we have not asked for an exception. We've been below it, some years 0, but last year was 1.1 when the index was 4.1. So we're cognizant of our taxpayers over tax.
Thank you, Mr. Fishbein. Before I go to the public, I know the answer, but I know we have some board members who are newer and haven't lived through an adjusted index. So could you share why are we 5.3 when Act
I
One?
think just rounding. I don't think there's any magic to that number.
Okay, because in
Officially
the
listed
past, I was
numbers.
under the impression that it was if a community was economically disadvantaged, it would be inflated.
There would be a significant adjustment. I think that's the official posted rate, 5.5.
Okay,
Which I
great.
think is just rounding.
So then it's not as fun as I was.
I'm sorry, Dan.
But recently we were adjusted Act One, and it was a little bit anomalous. But the irony is districts in Pennsylvania are capped at 5.25 unless they're impoverished, in which case they can raise taxes even more than that, which is kind of a backwards way of thinking.
Right.
But yes.
Yeah, just very briefly, if you look at the numbers to the base index, they're all only to the first decimal place, so logically, they did round up.
Right. That makes sense. Anyway. We don't have to worry about that.
So she's trying to bring some excitement.
Yeah, I promise to exciting number.
Spice it up.
So at any rate, thank you very much for the presentation. Is there any questions from the public about Act One? Seeing none, I think we could
Motion to adjourn.
entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Fishbein. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Epps, all in favor?
Aye.
Go Phillies.